So in this video, I'm going to be going over the creation of a hollow Bloodpool model using ITK-Snap and Meshmixer. So first thing that I'm going to do is launch ITK-Snap and load my DICOM data, which is a CT data. So I'm going to browse for that, which is saved locally in my computer. So once I find it, I want to hit the first image in the series to load it. Okay. And going through here, I usually hit on the image that has the most, the series with the most images, which tends to work the best for me. So the first thing that I want to do is to right click on there and do an auto contrast adjustment, just to make sure that I can see pretty decently. Next, I want to go to segmentation label editor to create my labels. So I know that I'm only going to be working with one label for this one, which is going to be my Bloodpool model. So I'm going to delete all the others except for the clear label, which is going to be the empty space that I'm going to be working with. So I'm going to change the name of this to Bloodpool. Here I can also change the color or opacity of a single label. Okay. And so I want to make sure my active label is a Bloodpool, and then I'm also just drawing over the clear label. So whenever my mouse is over, by rotating the mouse wheel, will go throughout the slices. I can then zoom in by hitting the right click and going on a diagonal, and then using the mouse wheel by pressing it down to pan through. And left click will move my cursor. So I'm going to be using this auto segmentation tool called the snake tool. First thing I want to do is to set my ROI, which is the region of interest. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with one of the ventricles. So I want to make sure that I go throughout my 3 views to make sure that my ROI box is on the right area. Once I got that done, I can hit segment 3D. Anything here that's in white is going to be within the right threshold. Anything that's within the blue will not be segmented. So I want to scroll through the slices to make sure that I have the right parts isolated, and I want to make sure that I'm just getting the Bloodpool and I'm not getting that septum. So I want to make sure that my segmentation will stay within that ventricle and not jump to the other ventricle or to maybe some ribs that are nearby or other bone. So once I've got that set, I can see it ends there, and I'm not getting any of the diaphragm either. So I can hit next, and I will be creating a bubble at my cursor by hitting that button there, and I want to shrink it down just to a size where it fits comfortably within all 3 of my views. Hitting play will start our bubble growth, and you can see it just move through. And I like to scroll through the slices as I'm going through, just to make sure that it's not jumping over to an area that I don't want to segment. Perfect. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to pause the segmentation, and then hit finish. Now it shows up on my 3 views. Hitting update will show the model itself and what I've segmented already. And then I'm going to go to segmentation, save segmentation, and then I'm going to browse to where I want to save it after I've given it a name, because otherwise it will just save it in the same folder as the DICOMs. So create a new folder. Here's where I'm going to save my segmentations, and then later on I'm also going to save my Meshmixer files in this same folder. Perfect. And now I can hit Control Save to save it. So what I like to do is I like to create a few many small segmentations using the snake tool. And what this allows is it allows for me to be a little bit more precise, and I have less manual editing that way. So again, I'm going through the 3 views, the axial, coronal, and sagittal, to make sure that I'm getting all of the appropriate places. By hitting on that white and blue area, I see what is then being segmented. And I like just setting it up in the threshold modes to just manipulate the lower threshold. Again, create that bubble. And for me, I like to just create one bubble for all of these small segmentations. It allows me to track what's being segmented a little bit better, and I find that it goes a pretty decent speed. If you are doing a larger area, you can add more bubbles. Just wherever your cursor is, if you hit that add bubble, it will create one. Perfect. Looks like I've got all my segmentation done. So again, I'm going to pause it and hit finish. And then again, I have to update the model to show what the new segmentation has done. Awesome. Looks like I'm getting some pretty good segmentation of the blood pool. So again, now I'm going to move up and go into the top part of the ventricle and into the atriums. Now the whole goal is just to make sure that I'm not segmenting out that septum. And yeah, if you look on your the crosshairs, those blue crosshairs, it allows you to see kind of a little bit better where you are in the other views. By moving up and down through the different slices, you can see that crosshair move, which helps me a lot at identifying where I am within the DICOM set. Perfect. Again, add the bubble. And see, it's a really small size, so we're going to boost that up because I've found pretty much if it's anything below 1, it doesn't really like to do that segmentation. So sometimes you won't be able to do use the snake tool on small areas. That's something that you'll have to do a manual segmentation with either the paintbrush tool, which I like, or the polygon tool. So here it crashed, mostly because I was using my 4K monitor because it looks a lot better in the screen captures. I also got a notification while I was doing this that they had a new version of ITK-Snap, which I downloaded later on. So good thing I saved, so we will have to open it up. Here's back once I have everything loaded. I missed a little bit of the screen capture, but I'm up into the into one of the atriums now. So I like to go through the scan to make sure that we're going past that valve, and just to make sure that I am segmenting out areas that are connected and should be segmented, not jumping over because I have the wrong thresholding. So now I've got that entire atrium and entire ventricle and part of the atrium. So next, I like to just scan through. I am a designer and not a radiologist, cardiologist, or any form of doctor. So for me, going up and down through the scans, I'm able to kind of orient myself to make sure that I'm segmenting out the right areas. Perfect. So sometimes you'll find an area that you've missed, and the 3D crosshair mode is a really nice way of doing that. It's right there in the bottom left. And what that allows you to do is to click on part of the model, and it'll bring your crosshairs right to there on all 3 views. So now I can just move my ROI box up to where I want to segment, and I can fill in that area. So once I've got that, segment 3D, make sure my thresholding is still good. It will save your thresholding after each segmentation. Sometimes you'll have to adjust that a little bit, but a lot of times it should be pretty decent, and you'll just have to do some small adjustments after you figure it out the first time. So now we've clicked update, and we've filled in that area that I had missed. So here you can see that it has jumped across that septum into the other atrium. So that's something that I'll have to do some manual editing to. Just to make sure so I can see a little bit better, you can go in the bottom and you can change the opacity of your segmentation. So sometimes I will do this if I really have to look at the scan to understand what's going on, or if there is an area that I've missed. So now we're going to do some manual segmentation using that paintbrush tool. So what I'm going to make is I'm going to change up, so my active layer is that clear label, and that I'm painting over the red Bloodpool label. And I like to use the round brush, and then you can decide the size of your brush depending on what you are segmenting, and also toggling that 3D brush option, which will allow you to work on multiple scans at once, which sometimes work really well Other times you'll find yourself erasing areas that you don't want to, or adding in areas that you don't want to. So just be careful with that, and you'll learn when to use that and when not to. Perfect. Now we're going to go back and we're going to continue on. Oh, sorry. We're doing a little bit more manual segmentation, just making sure that's nice and cleaned up. Perfect. So we're finding that flat spot, and now we're just going to continue on with the snake tool and doing some more segmentation. So what I want to make sure as well is when I'm setting that ROI box, that part of it is still in the old segmentation within the red. This makes sure that I don't have little lines of slices that it's missed, because that's something that I'd have to then clean up later, because I probably won't be able to do a large segmentation for that. So that's something I'd have to do probably manually. So again, creating that bubble. Now here I had the wrong label because I had it from when I was doing the erasing. So you can go through and swap that back over. There are quick selection ones, and sometimes they work for you. Otherwise, you'll have to go in and do that both yourself. So as you can see, oh, we had another crash. So a good thing I saved right before I did this, so I didn't really lose very much. So then I'll have to go back in and reload the segmentation and the DICOM data. So to reload it, you're going to open up Snap again, open your DICOM images like we did before. So again, selecting the first image in the series, and then selecting the series that you want to work with. Now to open that segmentation, you're going to segmentation, open, and we're just going to browse to the folder that we saved it in the beginning. Open that, and you'll see it pops up on all the views, but you have to hit update to be able to see that model. So we're going to go back and redo that ROI. Again, every time you relaunch it, or if you hit reset ROI, your box will be as large as the scan itself. And you will also have to redo that thresholding because it won't be saved from before because it crashed. Just going through and segmenting out those arteries. Yeah, I like to work with one side of the heart and just kind of follow that all the way through. I believe this model here, when I was working on it, the patient suffers from a coarctation of the aorta, which we'll see later on. So that will be something I want to highlight at the end. Yeah, as you see here, I'm going through just the different slices, or the different views, to make sure that I have the right area segmented. So there you can see that it bled through into a different area. So that means that my thresholding wasn't quite perfect, so I have to adjust that to make sure that we're just getting the area that I want to segment. Perfect. Looks pretty decent. There's a little bit of something at the bottom there that I think was segmented improperly, but we'll fix that later on. Creating the bubble, and then I wanted to shrink it down a little bit because it was near the edge on some of the views. And here I believe, oh, there we go. Update the model again. here we can see that coarctation of the aorta, where it just gets super tiny, right at the top of the aorta. Yeah, you can really imagine how that would just stop blood flow going to the body. So that'll be what we want to show in the model later on when we're doing that editing. And going through here, we can watch the segmentation flow through from that ascending aorta to the descending aorta. When doing the descending aorta, I want to make sure that I'm not getting part of the spine, and sometimes you'll have to watch the ROI because it will cut off it in a kind of an odd area. So we'll continue that descending aorta. Deciding how big we want that box to be, and then just going through the scans, the slices, to then make sure that we are not having any areas where it is branching over, either to the pulmonary arteries or to the spine. And again, zooming in, you can zoom in the exact same way you do with the larger views, which is just with the right click on the mouse and moving it on a diagonal. So I want to shrink that down a little bit just because it's very close to, the bubble was very close to the edge on the one view, the axial view. And so yeah, right there, it looks like it never jumped over. So I've got a good segmentation of it. So updating it, and we can see that descending aorta added to the model. Awesome. Looks like it did at one point here. It looks like it branched over onto the arteries. So we'll go through them and we'll clean that up just a little bit. So we're going to change it so that our active label is the clear label. So again, it acts like an eraser. At this point, I'm so close to everything that I want to have a small brush and turn off 3D so that I'm not erasing something that I don't want to. Just going through very carefully. Again, some of this manual segmentation I'll do on my Wacom tablet. That really speeds things up. But for this, we're just doing a little bit of manual segmentation, so I can just do it with the mouse. Again, just getting in that habit of either hitting Control S or going through and saving quite regularly is a great idea. So I want to go through just to make sure that I didn't miss anything. And now I thought about making a new label for the other side of the heart, but for this video, I'm just going to work within the one Bloodpool label. Makes it a little bit easier for export, as I don't need to stitch the two STLs together later on. So we have a couple areas where the septum was accidentally segmented. So again, just using that 3D crosshair tools in the bottom left to find where that is in the model, and then going through and erasing. So here I'm right clicking actually because it's just a small area and I don't want to change my active label. So if you right click, it actually flips the two and works as an eraser. So for small areas you can do that. If you are doing larger things, I'd recommend going through and changing your labels. But for this little bit of cleanup, I can just do that. So again, zooming in and then finding those areas, turning on 3D crosshair mode, clicking it, and then I can see where I need to erase. Perfect. Now we can continue on. So I can move that segmentation to where my crosshairs are, the ROI box, and I can start again with the bottom of the ventricle, which for me I find a lot easier. So now we'll be working on the right side of the heart. So in this scan itself, the right side of the heart, I think there's a lot more muscle in there. I'm not exactly sure, or if that's just where the contrast was, but my resolution is a lot lower. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to do a few small segmentations just to get everything correct. Because if I lower the threshold enough where I don't get the septum, I'm losing a lot of other areas as well. So we'll start with this here. And also too, I believe this is a newborn's heart, which has a lot of muscle, very thick muscle within the heart. So here I want to do a small segmentation so we're not getting the sternum or parts of the ribs. So I'm just going through those, I was just going through those different scans there to identify what different parts were, to make sure I am segmenting out what I want to segment. Perfect, pause and finish, update the model, and we're getting more and more of that ventricle. Again, it can take a little bit of time, but it seems like the carefuler I am, the less editing I'm having to do later on with either manual segmentations with the paintbrush tool or then in Meshmixer. So taking my time doing small segmentations is really going to save me time in the long run. So sometimes if you see stuff where it is crossing over into the wrong side, being careful to watch that segmentation and then pausing it before that actually happens, or just when there's just a little bit, give you less stuff to segment out later on. See right there, we're having some issues where the septum is fairly low contrast. So we're going to make sure that it doesn't jump over. Perfect. Oops. Again, if you ever do lose your ROI box, hitting reset ROI will just make it as large as the full scan, so then you can go and find it and then shrink it down to the area you want. Just continuing on to make sure that we're doing a good segmentation, and it just really is just this repetition of doing these semi-automatic segmentations and just being really careful. And see if there's any areas like that where there's flat areas that I know that's some place where it was stopped against the ROI box. So something I'll have to go back and look at later. Maybe I did have the wrong thresholding, maybe the box wasn't big enough, or maybe I'll just have to do a little bit of manual segmentation. Model there, and we got a fairly large segmentation. Again, remember to save. We'll just go through some more, setting up the ROI box, going through the scans to make sure that I'm going to be able to identify what part I'm actually wanting to segment out. So there are the arteries. So here there are some spaces where it's fairly close proximity to each other, so I want to make sure that I'm getting just those little chunks. Again, I forgot to save before I did the segmentation, especially on small things. I find that sometimes it will freeze on those, so I like to make sure I really do save before that. Again, sometimes you can only do a segmentation when the bubble is somewhere around 1 or bigger. So if you are in an area where it's just not working, every time you hit play, the bubble won't grow. You'll have to do a manual segmentation because of that. Perfect, we're gonna get that atrium. As you can see here, if I go down too low, I'm losing a lot of that detail. So this means that I'm gonna have to actually make my ROI box a bit smaller. Alright, this is a ventricle. Oops. Alright, there we go. It is the atrium. I don't remember. Anyways, we're making our way through here. So as you can see in the bottom right, there was a little bit where it was crossing over a septum. Oh, and see it bled over, so that means I'm going to have to lower that thresholding just a little bit. I try to do that as little bit as possible, that way I still get some good resolution. See here. See there where it branched over into the aorta. I was able to pause it in time so it didn't do too much, but we can go in then and we can find it and just do a little bit of erasing. I like that you can watch the crosshairs on the model or any of the views to kind of locate yourself on the other views. Again, just doing some drawing. Yeah, this is something that sometimes I will leave off to the very end. I'll kind of make a note about all the places I'll have to do manual segmentation, and then I'll bring it over onto my tablet computer, and then I'll just do that all very quickly. This is something too, once you're in this zoomed in view, sometimes it can get a little bit confusing about where you are. So I kind of try to orient myself before. So those flat areas there are places that got stopped because of the ROI box. So I'll have to go in and continue that segmentation. You can see here what I've missed. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to see, but you can go through and figure it out. Oh, and I had the wrong active label, so swapping that again. Perfect. And we have a really low tolerance between those two pieces, between the atrium and those arteries. So two sides of the heart, there is not much room there at all. So that might, I forget exactly how I fixed that. I think I did a little bit of, a little bit of manual segmentation and really looking at the scans themselves and determining from the different contrast levels what was blood and what was muscle to then identify where those septums are so that I wasn't segmenting out the wrong places. And again, sometimes this can help you by looking at the different views. Here you can see once I lowered that thresholding a little bit too much, I start to lose a lot of the detail. So we'll do this here, and we'll see how that turns out. Starting to fill in that area. Sorry that the window is so small. I found when I was using my 4K monitor, if I made it smaller, it crashed a little bit less. And also too, a lot of times once you're finished in segmentation, it'll resize it as well on the screen. But here I'll show you, I think this is nearing the end of the segmentation. Just a few little areas that I need to clean up. There we go. Doing a little bit more on the aorta. I believe that's what we're working on right now. Yeah, I had just an area where one of those branches on the aorta wasn't defined properly. And also too, you can see there's a section right before the descending aorta that I missed. So again, we'll go in there and just use a small box. Perfect. Thresholding was the same because I was just working on the aorta, so there's a good chance the thresholding is just going to be perfect. So I might as well try that out. Update the model. There we go. A couple other small areas that I missed. Again, if you can't find it, hitting that reset ROI will bring the box back to somewhere that you can use it, and then just shrinking it down. Awesome. That filled it in really nicely. A couple other small areas that I want to just touch up and add a little bit more of segmentation to. For this heart, I believe the only defect in it is that coarctation of the aorta. So for the rest of it, it does have normal anatomy. Perfect. There we go. Now we can just go through that scan and look for any areas that I've missed. Here we have that big jump, kind of where we were talking about before, that I think I did some manual editing later on. There, wasn't quite sure what was going on. So we're going to do some manual segmentation of that septum. Again, using the round brush is my favorite, and using that clear label, I can shrink that down just a little bit and draw that in, just because the contrast wasn't quite high enough to make sure that it was all segmented properly. So there's my problem, which is one of the reasons why we're getting that weird sort of flat edge, is that I did miss a little bit there. Cool, going through, it's looking like most of it is all right. Perfect, so we can then lower down our segmentation so I can see just a little bit better about what's going on. You can also manually adjust that by right-clicking on your scan. You can then go in and you can try to adjust it a little bit better. Sometimes this works to be able to see what's going on a bit better. For the most part, I think the auto contrast works pretty decently. But here I'm just going to draw it in with a very small brush. And we'll see how this looks. Again, using this tool, using the snake tool, I have to do very little manual segmentation, but sometimes you do, just to do a little bit of cleanup. good. Just going through here trying to understand what exactly is going on, because the CT images, any of the DICOM images, can be a bit confusing, especially if you're not really versed in the anatomy. So for me, there's a bit of a learning curve. It's a big area that it looks like I've missed. Yeah, I like how you can watch the crosshairs move up and down as you move through the model, as you move through the views, and you can relate that back to the model. There, instead of resetting the ROI, I went and found that box and then dragged it over to the crosshairs. That can be a quick way of not having to go through the process of resizing the ROI box as much. Update. Let's see here. Perfect. Got that almost all filled in. So a little section there that I missed. So let's just do a small segmentation. Perfect. I know that I'm just isolated the area I want to segment. Hitting update, and we filled that in. Perfect. Now again, just choosing to save the segmentation in case it crashes, so I'm not losing all my work. Awesome, so make sure I've got everything saved. And let's see what we've got here. I think I had to go somewhere, so I'm reopening it now. And so I've got the finished Bloodpool model. After I think I've done some segmentation here on my tablet, just to clean it up a little bit. But my overall my model is looking really good. I'm happy with it. I'm happy with the segmentation I've done. So now it's time to export it. I'm going to export as surface mesh, and since I just have the one label, I'm going to choose to just export that. I'm going to make sure that I save it as an STL, but first we're going to name it. We're going to make it as STL mesh file, and then we're going to browse, go back to my model folder, and save it there. Awesome. Hit finish. And now we're all done in ITK-Snap, and we're going to move over to Meshmixer, where we're going to do the hollowing out of the model and some little bit of editing. And so since this is an arch anomaly with the coarctation of the aorta, I don't really need to create a myocardium for this model, because we don't. So what we're going to do is I'm going to import the model that we just created, that STL that we created in ITK-Snap. So first thing I want to do is, it's a fairly large file, so I'm going to shrink that down a bit. Cool, so it's looking actually really good. So I'm going to use the select tool, hit the shortcut E for everything, and then we're going to go to edit and reduce. And what that does is it reduces the triangle count and makes the model smaller, but really doesn't lose much quality. So I like to use percentage, and I want to make sure it has shape preserving on so that I'm not losing any of the boundaries. And for me, for the most part, 50% reduction seems to work pretty well. If you do hit W on your keyboard, you can see all of those triangles, but I don't think I did that in this video. Perfect. Now we're going to clear our selection. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to offset the model. So we're going to select all again. So clicking on select, hitting on the model, hitting E for everything, and then going to edit and offset. Now this loading can take a while. I sped it up. It can take roughly 5 minutes for it to load. So here you're going to be able to change your offset. Here we have it offset to 0.5. The more you offset, The stranger your outer anatomy is going to look, the more likely that things are going to start touching. You're going to start losing some of that detail. And it kind of starts to look more cartoonish. Things are blown out of proportions, things like that. So here we're changing it to 1 millimeter, and you can see the ends of some of the veins and things coming off of the heart just start to look very strange. So I found that somewhere around that 0.7 to 1 works really well, depending on the size of the model. You're going to want to remember this number that you offset it by, because that's going to be the same distance that you hollow out the model. So next we're going to go to Edit, Hollow. And by, again, this can take a while, that loading. So again, by hollowing it out the same amount, what that does is it preserves that structure, pretty much turning that solid blood pool into the hollowed out texture. So you have the outer anatomy, the inner anatomy, sorry, being correct. So now we're going to use Edit Plane Cut to cut open that descending aorta. And on this model here, I didn't segment it out far enough to not cut the ventricles. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to make it so that we only cut that certain area. So we're going to go into Select, and we are going to click around the area that we want to select. Now we're going to go to Edit Plane Cut. And we can see then it'll only affect that area that's selected. Perfect. Now there is that coarctation of the aorta. And I want to open up some of the branches. I think that's what we're doing next. Yep. So here you can see that that big blue arrow, once you click it, it decides what side of the model you are cutting. And you can choose to then, you can choose also in the options above there to discard the piece that you cut off or to turn it into two separate shells. In this model, I believe I just discard everything, but on some models where I want to cut the heart in half, let's say, I want to keep both shells and then print them separately. Here again, you have to get the blue arrow. Perfect. So next, I want to go to Meshmix and create a cylinder. And this is something I'm going to use to create a hole in that aorta. So I'm just going here, and I'm going to type in the dimensions that I want. Oh, 1 millimeter. Yeah, that's too small. 10, something like that. Play around with it, and now we can just use those arrows to drag it into position. So what I want to create is I want to create a hole in the aorta so that trainees, residents, patients, whoever's looking at this model can then look through that aorta to really see how small it gets where it's restricted. You can also click those little boxes to drag and to scale that specific dimension. And then the curved lines there are going to be your rotate. Hitting accept. Well, for some reason, I don't know why that happened, it didn't work, but we can go back to Edit, Transform, make sure we selected the right piece, and we can just do that again. Accept, and we're good. So now what I want to do is I want to select both pieces. So I want to hit Shift and then left click both of them, and now what I want to do is Boolean subtraction. And so what that did is it created a hole in the heart model that was the exact same size as that cylinder. Hitting accept once I'm happy with it. Now maybe I also want to see into the bottom of the left heart to be able to see where that aorta comes from. So I can create a plane cut. Pull that into position just to cut a certain part off of the ventricle, so that I can take a look inside of the heart. Remember to click that big blue arrow, Yeah, there we go. To make sure I'm deleting the right side. And so now I can see inside of that the ventricle up into the aorta, and now I've got a model that's pretty much ready for print, which is pretty awesome. Let's see here. Next, I want to go to Analysis Inspector. So that's going to show me if there's any issues. So you can either click on those little balls and it'll fix them. If there is a lot, you can hit that auto repair and it works really well. So next we're going to export our model as an STL. Typing in the name and saving our model. Perfect. Now you can bring that into whatever type of slicing program you're going to be using to create the G-code to run in your printer. Just for right now, I'll show you on Cura. And let's see here. Once this loads, we can take a look. And that's where we'll be setting everything up. I just want to give you guys a quick, to show you guys what it's going to look like. Here's where you'll set up your supports. For our models, we're going to be doing a little bit more complicated ones in the future, so we are going to have to do stuff with a dissolvable support, whether that's through an FDM printer with 2 nozzles or some sort of polyjet printer. I think that'll be really fun in the future. So yeah, there's our model. Ready for print, we can send it off. And you can see inside of that ventricle all the way up top. Now if I was just printing this with a normal FDM printer, we'd have tons of supports in there and it probably wouldn't work. But yeah, there's the model. Thank you guys for watching.